Order. Welcome to meeting number 21 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 3, the committee is meeting on its study of foreign election interference. Today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before I continued, I'd ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. You'll notice a QR code. You can scan it, watch a video for awareness. A few comments for the benefits of the members. Reminder that all comments should be directed or addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I would like to welcome today's witnesses from the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, Vanessa Lloyd. She's the Deputy Director of Security and Intelligence Threats to Election Task Force. From the Communication Security Establishment, Bridget Walsh, Associate Head, Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Salou Babou, who's the Executive Director of the Rapid Response Mechanism. And from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Greg O'Haley, Deputy Director, Federal Policing, Security, Intelligence, Intelligence and International Policing, Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force. It's a lot of intelligence in that title, but thank you for being here. Ms. Lloyd will be delivering opening remarks on behalf of everyone for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to you and to the members of the committee. As mentioned, my name is Vanessa Lloyd, and I am the Deputy Director of Operations at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. I'm appearing this morning in my capacity as the CSIS Chair of the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, or the SITE Task Force, during last year's 45th general election. I'm joined this morning by my colleagues from 3 other member organizations of the SITE Task Force, Bridget Walsh, who is the Associate Head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, part of the Communication Security Establishment Canada, Greg O'Haley, Director General of Federal Policing, and Salou Babou, the Executive Director of Rapid Response Mechanism Canada at Global Affairs Canada. Members of the committee may recognize Ms. Walsh and Mr. O'Haley and myself from our participation in the weekly media technical briefings during the election period, where we were also joined by the Assistant Secretary to Cabinet Communications, Lori Ann Kempton, Assistant Secretary to Cabinet, Alan Sutherland, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister Global Affairs, Larissa Galazda, and my colleague Anam Alvi, the Executive Lead for Operations at CSIS. Mr. Babou also had the pleasure to appear before you last week. I would also like to take a moment to highlight the involvement of other partners at Public Safety Canada, including the Foreign Interference Coordinator, at the Integrated Threat Assessment Centre, or ITAC, and at the Office of the Commissioner of Elections, as well as Elections Canada, who contributed to, supported, or considered the work of the SITE Task Force during the election. For example, during daily meetings of the Assistant Deputy Minister's Election Security Coordinating Committee, or ADM-ESCC, which was co-chaired by the Privy Council Office. Each of these representatives and their teams were proud to have had a role in protecting the integrity of the last general election from foreign interference, manipulation, and interference, from foreign information manipulation and interference, transnational repression, cyber threats, and violent extremism. It's our privilege to represent a part of that work by appearing before this committee today. I will start with a reminder to members that while the SITE Task Force was stood up to provide enhanced monitoring of threats to General Election 45 from March 24th to May 5th of 2025, the ongoing work of its member departments and agencies and partners continues year-round under our respective mandates and as a strong national security community. This collective expertise and cooperation ensured that SITE's reporting and assessments included information, intelligence, and insights from all member organizations to form a comprehensive understanding of a range of threat actor capabilities, intentions, and potential actions before and during the electoral process. Those assessments were leveraged in the government's preparation for General Election 45, for example, via periodic briefings to the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol Panel, or the panel, and the Election Security Coordinating Committee. By the task force inclusion in pre-election training sessions for key stakeholders, and by the task force participation in engagement efforts, for example, with the House of Commons and the Leaders' Debates Commission. Similarly, once the election was called, CITE delivered classified briefings to security-cleared representatives of political parties on possible threats to GE45, providing them with nonpartisan insights and information to help protect their campaigns. The task force also developed and contributed information on tactics used by threat actors, as well as personal and cybersecurity advice, which was sent to all confirmed candidates by the Privy Council Office, along with instructions on how to report incidents of potential foreign interference, cyber or violent extremist threats to CITE. During the monitoring period, CITE produced daily situational reports based on reporting from the task force members. We met weekly and supported the daily ADM Election Security Coordinating Committee meetings. The ADM Election Security Coordinating Committee reviewed CITE reporting and provided recommendations to the panel via weekly briefings by the Director of CSIS as the chair of CITE on behalf of the CITE task force. Any perceived threat can erode public confidence and trust in the integrity of Canada's democratic processes and institutions. Enabling an informed and resilient public is the best way to counter foreign interference. As such, the CITE task force members participated in the government's weekly media technical briefings on 5 occasions during the writ period, increasing transparency by sharing information about the threats that Canada faces and measures put in place to detect and counter those threats. These technical briefings help to inform Canadians of observed incidents and the evolving threat environment as a whole, as well as to provide reminders and best practice recommendations for the public in navigating the online ecosystem pre-election day. Tools and resources published by the government and by individual CITE members prior to and during the election period were highlighted, as was the ongoing work taking place to safeguard the election. This included providing an outline of the threat landscape during the first technical briefing and sharing information about the threat posed by detected instances of digital transnational repression and online information operations, as well as an overview of CSE's 5th report on cyber threats to Canada's democratic processes during subsequent briefings. The technical briefings ultimately informed the media and the public that CITE had not observed incidents that had been determined by the panel to have impacted Canada's ability to have a free and fair election. This assurance was provided in advance of Canadians casting their votes. Following the election, CITE published an after-action report, which detailed both CITE's assessments in advance of the election and observed instances of foreign interference during the election. The report affirms that during the election period, CITE observed instances of foreign interference, such as digital transnational repression, inauthentic and coordinated amplification of online content, and online threats such as scams and disinformation. These activities were observed at a small scale and remain difficult to attribute to a foreign actor. 2 of these instances were discussed openly during the weekly technical briefings, and the report emphasizes that it is essential to remain vigilant against foreign interference, which can take the form of information manipulation and transnational repression. Citizens who are informed about the threats to democracy are better equipped to critically evaluate information and resist manipulation, helping them to confidently cast their votes and engage in ongoing democratic processes at all levels of government. Building this resilience involves making sure Canadians have access to reliable and factual information, which is precisely why the CITE Task Force engaged in such proactive communications. CITE hopes that the after-action report is helpful to citizens and to this committee in this regard. The CITE Task Force will continue to share information publicly about the threats that Canada faces during future democratic processes, as well about the measures being put in place to detect and counter them. Individual task force members will also continue investigative efforts under the department's or agency's mandates and to communicate with the public when possible. Mr. Chair, thank you again for the opportunity to do that today and to be a part of the committee's study. My colleagues and I would be pleased to answer and take questions from members.
Thank you so much. We'll first go to Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Ms. Lloyd, you indicated that the site task force did not observe foreign interference activities that rose to the level of threatening Canada's ability to have a free and fair election pursuant to the Cabinet Directive on the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol. I would hope you would concede that's a high threshold to meet.
Mr. Chair, through you, thank you for the member's question. The threshold for that determination is set according to the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol, and the job of the site task force members was to ensure that we put all instances of reported threats to Canada's security, be it foreign interference or threats from violent extremism, before the panel for their consideration.
Well, it is a high threshold because it would be national in scope, wouldn't it? We're talking about compromising the ability to have a free and fair election across Canada. That's the standard.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I believe our colleagues that appeared before you from the panel last week spoke to and gave evidence to that effect. What we want to ensure...
I hope, Ms. Lloyd, with the greatest respect, that you would be familiar enough with the standard to answer yes or no to that.
Thank you to the member for the question. What I will reiterate is that the job of the site member task force was to ensure that we had communicated sufficiently with Canadians such that it was clear that individual candidates, campaigns,
I gave you a very simple, I'm not trying to be adversarial here, but I am trying to get some basic answers. And I cited it's in response to your testimony where you said the determination was reached that interference activities did not rise to the level of threatening Canada's ability to have a free and fair election. And I asked you first that that's a high standard, and second of all, that in order for that standard to apply, that would encompass threats on a national scope. Straightforward questions. Just an answer, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'll reiterate that the determination whether the threshold has been met is one that is made not by the site task force members but by the panel, and that our responsibility in this process is to ensure that the ability for Canadians, campaigns and candidates to report to the site task force...
You won't answer that. The answer to that is yes. It's very clear.
Maybe, Mr. Chair, if you'll permit me to add a little bit of elaboration to the response.
I don't need a further elaboration because my time is limited. We know that Beijing targeted Conservative candidate Joe Tay in Don Valley North. In addition to Don Valley North, and how many other ridings were foreign interference activities detected during the 2025 election?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. What I can tell the committee is that the site task force ensured that prior to the election, all security-cleared representatives of the parties were provided the mechanism to ensure that all campaigns and individual candidates had the ability to report to site instances where they felt that foreign interference or other threats to the election could have been
Ms. Lloyd, the site task force gathers intelligence and information. It provides it to the panel. The panel is tasked with the cabinet directive that includes informing candidates, that determines whether to go public, that determines whether threats reach the level of compromising an election on a national scale. I just asked you a simple question. How many ridings, aside from Don Valley North, were targeted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not able to provide you the number of reports that came into the site task force. What I can assure the committee is that all incidents that were reported by the public, by candidates
if you can't provide a number, then can someone on the panel provide a number?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Isn't it the witness supposed to have the same time as the question to answer?
It's Mr. Cooper's time. We've paused it. It is Mr. Cooper's time to address it. I guess typically that is what the case is. But if there is a lead up and a what is typically a yes or no question, or a leading question, as we'd call it back when I was practicing law, it was, I think, a short answer would be expected. So it is the member's time, and I'll turn it back to Mr. Cooper.
Maybe if I can add, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So what I can say is that we worked across all our mandates. So each of the agencies who's a member of SITE looked across threats coming to any and all ridings and really made sure that we were putting together that intelligence to inform the panel. I think a very important part of that process this year was coming back and reporting to Canadians, not just on some of the individual issues that came up, but also on the information that gave, as my colleague Ms. Lloyd mentioned previously.
I'm asking a simple question, and Ms. Lloyd referenced the fact that there were interference activities involving transnational repression, other activities, scamming, I think she referred to. And I'm just asking if there were other ridings on the radar of the RCMP on behalf of the security establishment, on behalf of CSIS, Foreign Affairs, that were noted. Were there other ridings? Were there other candidates targeted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question from the member. As my colleague has mentioned, the SITE task force members were alert and reported to the panel all instances.
I assume you're alert, and I assume you report to the panel. That's your job. But I asked a question, were any ridings, in addition to Don Valley North, were any other candidates targeted? Yes or no?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, we were alert and reported all instances across the country in all ridings.
It'd be a very unproductive meeting, because all we're getting is a stonewalling from the panel, Mr. Chair. And I think that when they, Mr. Chair, I do raise a concern.
Is this a point of order? Is this a point of order?
Point of order.
Point of order, Mr.
That,
Cooper.
when questions are put to witnesses, I think they have a duty to answer when I ask yes or no questions that are straightforward, to say, to obstruct, as we saw from this panel. I would just ask that you direct them to answer questions that are straightforward in nature.
Thank you so much. Sorry, do you, Madame Kabaga, do you wish to?
No, I just hope to get to my turn.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't make the witnesses answer. Your point has been made very clearly, Mr. Cooper. I have been in similar positions as a member of the committee to witnesses. Members are here; they are elected to represent their constituents. If there are reasons, be it for national security issues that are classified, perhaps those can be explained. But the expectation from members of this committee, if those issues are not classified, if they are not something that that members' questions should be addressed specifically, we have a lot of time left, and it will be a long committee meeting if this information isn't classified and members' questions aren't answered. So on that point, we will turn to Madame Kabaga for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I also would welcome our guests into this committee today. Maybe, Mrs. Lloyd, if I could just ask you, you did mention that you provided a a recommendation report of the public inquiry. Can you just let us know if the task force guarantees the nimbleness needed to adapt to evolving situations? How does it encourage a nimble response to foreign interference?
I'm sorry, would you
I'll re-ask my question. The recommendation report of the public inquiry into foreign interference states that SITE task force guarantees the nimbleness needed to adapt to evolving situations. How does it encourage a nimble response to foreign interference?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for the member's question. I think it is important to share with the committee how the Site Task Force has evolved its practices since the various studies on foreign interference, for example, by the experience of the public inquiry into foreign interference, as well as reports done by NSICOP on foreign interference. And so what was different about this election, in addition to the ongoing collaboration between the operational members that you see before you appearing today, is that we were much more transparent in terms of reporting to Canadians incidents as we were seeing them. So that was part of the direction given to the panel that was executed by the site members from the clerk's direction and guidance, which I believe the committee heard about in the testimony last week. So one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that as threat actors evolve their tactics, the government must do so as well. And so part of the mechanisms of countering foreign interference was to ensure that every candidate, campaign, and cleared representatives of each party understood what it is to recognize foreign interference now. And so part of the efforts that the site members did was to ensure that every confirmed candidate received an email from the site task force, which included information about how to detect foreign interference, made specifications about the difference between acceptable diplomatic behavior and that which was beyond diplomatic engagements, and also provided them information to protect their social and digital selves, as well as how to report to CSIS and the RCMP threats of physical intimidation or violence.
And from your perspective, do you think that the task force is prepared? How prepared is it compared to past elections going into another election?
The task force is always prepared since our experience of having now been stood up for 3 general elections. We have also been stood up since 2023 for 12 by-elections. And so I think the power that you see before you is the integrated approach of the national security community to be able to execute our investigations under our individual mandates. And as my colleague Ms. Walsh mentioned, to bring that insight and analysis together to be able to provide an informed view during a general election specifically to the panel, and during by-elections to the Deputy Minister Committee for Intelligence Action, who provides that, performs that role during the by-election functions.
And
What would you say to Canadians who are concerned about election interference, but may not fully understand the safeguards that are already in place? This is a concern that, we've been studying this for a while, and turns out a lot of Canadians are concerned. Can you just let them know some of the safeguards that are in place?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. During the 5 weekly tech briefs that we had, we covered a range of topics to ensure that we were sharing information with Canadians, again, for the purposes of making them more resilient to attempts of foreign interference and violent extremist threats. Part of the evolution of the way we approached the last general election was to ensure that a large amount of information was readily available to Canadians, and by explaining it both verbally during the tech briefings, but also publishing tools like the toolkit for threats to democratic institutions, and a large number of backgrounders as well as individual site members' reports and information available in multiple languages. So when we came forward to speak about instances of transnational repression, for example, that information, because of the nature of the threat actor, was provided both in English and French, but also in simplified Chinese. The CSIS Foreign Interference in EU document that I believe has been shared with this committee chairs in past appearances is available in 9 languages. And so part of doing the effort to communicate is to ensure that Canadians, down to the individual citizen level, are equipped, have the tools and the information to recognize threats against them, and in particular in the cyber domain, to help them be digitally savvy. So, for example, CSE's Get Cyber Ready, Aware, is one of the tools that we hope citizens use on an ongoing basis for their engagement in daily life.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can add to the response a little bit. We did a lot of work even ahead of the election, so put a lot of time into studying and understanding, for example, the threats posed by artificial intelligence to democratic processes, and put that out in advance. So from leading up to elections and making sure that there's a lot of information available to Canadians ahead of time, to briefing candidates, as Ms. Lloyd mentioned, so that we're providing a lot of information and resources. We offer a hotline to candidates during an election. So should they have any questions or concerns from a cybersecurity perspective, they've got, one number, one email they can reach to, so they're supported. And as Ms. Lloyd mentioned, we have the Get Cyber Safe campaign. It's true that it's tough to reach all Canadians and to make sure that everybody understands the message and the clarity, but we're certainly investing quite a bit to spread the message across social media, through the tech briefings that we had, and to make every effort to ensure that the guidance that we have, the advice we have, the really practical steps are available to Canadians and out there.
Thank you so much. And we will turn to Madame Normandin. There will be a cameo, which I am excited for. And apologies to our witnesses that they may not be the star of the show for today. But also on a side note, I don't understand how he could be sleeping during a PROC committee meeting. That's absolutely shocking. So, Madame Normandin, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. J'espère que je...
Thank you very much. I hope we'll be able to wake you up. Thank you to the witnesses for being here and those who have been here several times already. I have a question on the relationship between the panel and social media. Last week, Mr. PROC said that when misinformation is published online, in some cases he was able to contact social media and the pages were withdrawn. In a very collaborative way with certain social media platforms. Have you made any such requests, but which were turned down by these platforms? Because sometimes when this information is published, it can have an impact. So in some cases, after you made a request for information to be withdrawn, was that request denied? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. We have a fairly collaborative relationship with social media platforms. So the way we proceed, when we discover informational threats, we communicate with the platforms, and we submit that information to them so they can determine whether those threats run counter to their own terms of service. That's how we proceed. But the determination is made separately by each social media platform, and they can decide to withdraw the content or pursue the discussion with us. So it depends on the media platform. Some platforms are more collaborative than others. Our position is that we would rather let the platforms make that decision. And they would let us know what measures they will implement or not following our recommendations. But we feel it's our duty to communicate with those platforms every time we discover information which might be relevant to the situation. So it's a fairly transactional relationship we have with the platforms. I couldn't tell you which platforms are more reluctant to remove information than others. Some chose to speak openly after the federal election, others not. But our job is to bring this disinformation to their attention. Thank you, and I understand your answer. You mentioned collaboration, but it sounds like it doesn't happen in some cases, and some of these platforms are controlled by some countries, such as China, which is a big disinformation actor. So am I to understand that there's no way you can force a social media platform to remove certain types of information which could potentially be seen by millions of people? So if a platform doesn't want to collaborate, that's it? Well, it's not that straightforward, because communicating with the platforms is one of the tools at our disposal to counter misinformation. We have other tools at our disposal in collaboration with other partners of the security intelligence community. So stronger measures can be taken if necessary. Well, that's interesting as an answer. So at what point can you try to force a platform to withdraw information? If there is problematic information which remains online, And I'm referring to the question put to my Conservative colleague. It seems that there is a lack of willingness on the part of some platforms to remove this type of information. Well, just to be more specific, it's not that we don't want information to disappear per se. We are not in charge of content moderation online, but we want to counter misinformation or disinformation. So the position of the Canadian government is that we cannot force these platforms to remove content. Thank you. I'd like to hear you on the review of the national security strategy, which is currently in force. It goes back to 2004. That's pretty old. In 2025, Ms. Drouin received a mandate to update this policy, but she's leaving now. So I'm just wondering what is happening with the development or the presentation of a new national security strategy in the coming weeks or months or years.
Normandin. That would be beyond the purview of the members you have before you today, Madame Normandin. What I can say is that should a new national security strategy be issued, we would reflect on how that applies to our responsibilities as site members going forward to a next democratic process, whether that be a by-election or a general election.
Et aussi, oh, désolé. Est-ce que je peux ajouter un peu de nuance?
Can I add a nuance here with regard to my colleague's answer and our engagement with social media companies?
There were certainly engagements with social media companies to provide context. So while it's absolutely true, it's the purview of those social media companies who own their platforms and who moderate what goes on to it. We wanted to ensure that there was information about those threats provided to those companies. So our colleagues at the PCO, at the Privy Council Office, had arranged for regular meetings with the platforms. And at one point, we did brief on the types of threats that we see, especially the threats posed by artificial intelligence on the use of social media to propagate mis and disinformation and those sorts of things. The other thing I'll mention that when it comes to candidates in elections, you know, as I said, we ran a hotline and have a hotline for candidates to raise concerns about cybersecurity. And in those particular instances, you know, should a candidate ever say, you know, there's information about me, it's wrong online, we're not going to be able to go and contact the social media company and would not be in a position to ask them to take it down. But we can provide them with information and advice on what's available to them and the tools that are available to that candidate and to the party.
I'm going to have to interrupt there. We're well over. We'll turn to Mr. Jackson for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and nice to meet all the witnesses. Nice to see some of you again who have been here before. I'm just picking up on where Mr. Cooper left off. I think Canadians are quite concerned about this example of Don Valley North. It was shocking to me, frankly, and it's shocking to many of my constituents as a new member of Parliament that I talked to. So in what other constituencies were foreign interference activities detected during the 2025 election?
Chair, and to the member for the follow-up question. Perhaps I'll answer it this way. It's important to remind Canadians that the Site Member Task Force investigate threat activities of foreign states as it relates to foreign interference and individual entities that are of concern from the violent extremism perspective. And so we did say during the tech briefings that in not all instances would we be able to share the detail of where we detected those occurrences with Canadians.
Why would that be the case? Why would you not be able to share with Canadians whether their constituency was targeted by a foreign state or not? I don't understand the lack of transparency there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. If you'll permit me to finish. What we were trying to balance in terms of the instances where we did speak publicly, and we did so on 2 occasions out of the 5 appearances we had, were a number of concerns. One, we wanted to ensure that when we did speak publicly, we were not unduly amplifying the messages of foreign interference actors by contributing to the dialogue. Second, in some instances, we need to ensure that we are ensuring the integrity of national security investigations.
But I understand that during the election, ma'am, I really do. But we're well past the election now. The results are finalized, certified. They're in government. We're not. Like, it's pretty final. So I don't understand now why you cannot share that. Just give us the number of seats.
Maybe I can pop in and provide a bit of additional context. So, thank you very much for the question. We look all the time at threats. So while site stands up for enhanced monitoring during an election period or a by-election period, we all work together as colleagues, and our teams all work together as colleagues all the time. And if we see any threat, whether it be a foreign interference threat, for example, threatening our democratic processes, it's something that we would work together to address under our own mandates at any time.
So was my seat targeted? Do you think I have the right to know that as a member of Parliament?
So what I can tell thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So what I can tell the member is that during the course of the election, the security cleared representatives of each and all the parties were provided both with unclassified and classified briefs, and we ensured that any information that was reported to the site task force was understood during those conversations. And on the question of what is the impact, as my colleague said, post-election, as we have heard in testimony, and our minister has also said, the Minister of Public Safety, foreign interference itself is a threat that is persistent and pervasive, and that was also a conclusion of Commissioner Hogue. And so, as my colleague Bridget said, we do need to ensure that as we share information, necessary information to equip Canadians to be resilient against those threats, we are ensuring that we do not compromise
Okay,
our
so I've got one more question. In terms
of
Madame Drouin was here last week and testified at committee that countermeasures were deployed that disrupted or even neutralized attempts at foreign interference in certain constituencies. Will you tell us where those countermeasures were deployed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that I will frustrate the member with my answer, but it is important that we maintain as operational agencies the ability to protect our methodologies and our investigations that are an ongoing effort to ensure that Canadians are protected from the efforts of hostile states. And so I will not, for the reasons of protecting the integrity of those efforts, share the details of where we applied each and every instance of our interventions to protect Canadians during the election period.
So thank you for that. Was very clear, actually. So I appreciate that answer. I just find it very concerning that countermeasures aside, you will not tell Canadians which constituencies were targeted. And the Don Valley North example was not shared as widely as perhaps you think it was, as many of us were shocked to learn of the details. And so if there are other constituencies that are subjected to either threats during an election period or ongoing, I believe, and I think most of us believe, that Canadians have the right to know what those constituencies are that are being targeted by foreign states. And I'd strongly encourage you folks to reconsider being more accountable and publicly transparent about sharing those constituencies. Thank you, Chair.
All of our witnesses for being here more than once, actually, and your extensive experience is on display here, both in intelligence operations and national security threats assessment. So I do want to appreciate your service to free and fair elections. Maybe I would start with, maybe Ms. Lloyd, and if you wanted to direct the questions. You mentioned in your opening statement during the 2025 general election, the site task force provided weekly briefings to the media about foreign interference. What feedback did you receive from those briefings, and what role does Canadian media have in helping to reach the Canadian public?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question from the member. In fact, we are very grateful for the media being along with us on that journey to be able to share the information, as I said earlier, both verbally but also to point regularly and often to the tools that we were publishing and putting before Canadians during the course of the election. The purpose of doing so was to ensure that they had the tools they needed to navigate, in particular, the information ecosystem, and we received quite positive feedback, perhaps unusually from the media, in offering those briefings. I will also say that it was one of the elements that the security-cleared members of each party commended us for doing, because it allowed a frequent engagement with Canadians, and also for campaigns on the ground who were supporting individual candidates to understand how things were shifting and for issues to be alert of, and to encourage reporting both from Canadians but also from members of their campaigns, including volunteers.
Thank you. Ms. Walsh, you had started an answer before. Maybe I wanted to see if you can expand on it. What are some of the ways that Canadians themselves, when they're hearing this information, misinformation, disinformation, that they can contribute, they can learn, they can educate themselves? We're trying to reach out to Canadians themselves to help educate them. And it sounds like you've got a number of programs in place.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. So absolutely. So we do a lot of work to understand the threats that exist online. What are those cyber threats that target Canadians and Canadian organizations? So one piece of that is looking at the threats that come to our democratic process. And so approximately a year ago, we did publish a report on the threats AI pose to cybersecurity. And part of that is really about being transparent and providing a mechanism to let Canadians know what those threats are. So the fact that cyber threat actors are able to automate what they do it at scale and do it faster and in a less expensive way means the threats increase. The fact that we have generative AI that allows somebody to create deepfake images are things that have clear implications to our democratic process and the spreading of misinformation. So we publish that information and make it available so that Canadians are informed about their decision making, but it's not the only piece that we put out there. So, as mentioned previously, we have a campaign called the Get Cybersafe campaign that's used to distribute and disseminate that information on social media. We have resources on mis and disinformation and other cyber threats and things that anyone can do to implement to make themselves more resilient from a cybersecurity perspective. We're not the only ones, though. Our colleagues at the Privy Council Office have the Democracy Toolkit. Our colleagues at CSIS, at the service, produce information about those threats. All across the table, the Rapid Response Mechanism puts pieces out, and the RCMP has education campaigns. So it's not something that we only do, but there is an awful lot of work out there to make sure that Canadians are well informed heading in as they're making their choice to vote.
It's very, very helpful. Thank you for that. You mentioned, I believe it was Ms. Lloyd, that you have enhanced monitoring during elections, but always ongoing work in between at some sort of a reduced capacity. Then you also mentioned that there have been 12 by-elections that you've overseen. Can you give perspective on how a by-election is handled? It's not a full election, yet it's not off-season. How is that handled?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the member for the question. So since 2023, we have been mandated to stand up for every by-election. I would say the difference a key difference to understand is that during a by-election, we're not in a caretaker period. That means the panel is not stood up to be able to receive the information from the site task force, and instead it is considered on the same tempo and to the same depth of consideration by a Deputy Ministerial Committee for Intelligence and Action. And it is that body that then responds to the task force members in terms of the actions they would like us to take on what we've observed. All of those by-elections are subject to the same transparency as the general election in terms of the fact that we do publish, and you can find on PCO's website for site, the after-action reports for each of those 12 by-elections. And it makes clear where we saw or didn't see foreign interference. And to the member's point and to Ms. Walsh's comment, there are for certain threat actors a baseline of foreign interference threats, for example, that takes place all of the time. So while elections are an opportunity to conduct focused foreign interference, it is for certain threat actors a standard operating procedure of threats to democratic societies, including Canada.
Thank you so much. Because we have a 2-hour panel, we'll do Madame Normandin for 5 minutes, Mr. Cooper for 5, and Madame Briere for 5, and then we'll take a 5-minute break for the benefit of everyone. So, Madame Normandin, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais continuer sur...
Thank you very much. I'd like to continue with questioning on the disinformation on social media platforms, because in traditional paper media, there is not much of that. So, disinformation is the weak spot of the panel. You talked about cybersecurity and other threats, but disinformation is really what affects the outcome of an election the most. And I feel you don't have any measures in place to counter disinformation and to stop the broadcasting of bad information, wrong information, information which is biased, and there's no means to get social media platforms to remove that disinformation. We asked for examples of cybersecurity threats, but can you give us examples of disinformation? Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. To set the scene, if you will, we talk about the manipulation of information which goes beyond disinformation per se. It can include the amplification of bad information, wrong information. And it's not the work of the panel of our unit to determine what information is truthful or not. We are more focused on the source of the information. So if information is linked to a state actor, that information is not made public, or rather, we feel that information should be made public. And if misinformation goes viral, it's something that we also communicate to the public. Now, in terms of measures to counter the manipulation of information, you're absolutely right. We don't have a way to turn off the tap in the digital environment, and this in part goes back to what Ms. Walsh was saying earlier. We need to inform the public to make sure it develops a more critical thinking with regard to what is available online. Government agencies have a role to play in this, but civil society also has a role to play. We work with stakeholders, partners in civil society to make the public more aware and to develop more critical thinking with regard to information available online. There are other measures which can also be taken. We can focus on the sources of information which may be less credible, and this is what we did during the election. For instance, there was an incident where the sources of information were such that we were able to inform the Canadian public that that on WeChat, information was being put out by the Chinese government. So we have to be careful and with regard to when we point fingers or not. There is no silver bullet. We try to put as much information out there so Canadians can make informed choices with regard to the information they choose to accept. You said that it's not possible to turn off the faucet and that you're trying to find other ways to make Canadians understand that some information could be misinformation, problematic, but some people may not be on traditional media at all. So is there any way for us to even try to shut off that tap? Well, that's more an issue for lawmakers. And it's not up to us public servants to decide what posture to adopt with regard to social media platforms. I don't think our efforts are vain. I think we are taking the necessary measures. And in the last election, I believe we showed that we were very transparent by communicating as much information as possible to Canadians. It was our duty to do so. It was our responsibility to do so. As public servants. It's a continuous effort, and we will not stop.
To Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to continue where I left off, and I'm going to try again. In addition to Don Valley North, how many candidates and how many ridings were targeted by foreign interference activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for the member for the follow-up question. Unfortunately, I'm not able to tell you the numbers of the incidents or the reports that we received. I can tell you that foreign interference activities...
So you're not able to provide the numbers. Will you undertake to provide those numbers to the committee?
So, Mr. Chair, for reasons of privacy of the reporting and for national security reasons as it relates to the individual incidents, I can provide assurances to the member that in instances where we observed other incidences for which we cannot speak publicly, that those instances where it affected a riding or candidate were subject of conversations with the security cleared members of each party. And I would also mention to the committee that there is a classified version of our action report, and parliamentarians that sit on the National Security Committee, Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians have access to that report as well.
Well, thank you for that. And based upon your answer, I think I'm able to discern that there were other candidates and other ridings targeted. I'm not asking you to disclose the particulars of where those ridings are, who those candidates are. I was simply asking, would you be able to provide a number so we can have an idea of how big or how small this in fact was as a problem?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I believe I mentioned in my remarks, what we did observe was small scale, and in no instance did the panel determine that there was an impact on the nation's ability to have a free and fair election, nor at the riding levels. I could perhaps be helpful to the committee by sharing that we did receive reporting from individuals, members of the public, as well as from candidates. And so, as such, each of those incidences were explored by the various members before you today, and all of those instances were put before the panel for their consideration.
Okay, thank you for that. What foreign actors were responsible for these activities? We certainly know that Beijing was responsible for the targeting of Zhou Tai, as well as for the propaganda WeChat campaign involving Mark Carney, where they largely promoted him, but there were some contrasting narratives. So I presume Beijing was also involved in some of these other instances. Is that the case? And in addition to that, what other states were involved in these concerning activities?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Before we began the election period, the site task force did undertake an assessment of what we expected to see during the election period. And that included an overview that was provided to Canadians and the public through the very first technical brief. And in that, we outlined that we expected to see, as Member Namandim mentioned, a range of activities specific to disinformation, for example, as well as the potential for cyber activities. And we didn't expect to see incidences of violent extremism. So we went through each of the countries that we expected to see conduct some activities.
And my time is very limited, and I'm just trying to get to, I understand that there was work done in anticipation of what might happen during the election, but we've had the election. I'm asking what states were involved in the activities that were identified as being foreign interference.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the after-action report, we outlined that there were instances that were observed that related to the People's Republic of China, that related to Russia, and we indicated that we were also monitoring both for foreign interference efforts by India and by Pakistan.
Okay. Is the RCMP, so Mr. Ohayon, is the RCMP undertaking any investigations in respect of foreign interference-related activities that occurred during the 2025 election?
Thank you for the, interference with my hearing aids. Thank you for the question, Mr. President. As we confirmed during the tech briefs, an investigation was initiated into the incidents related to candidate Tai. However, in terms of confirming the existence of criminal investigations based that were triggered during General Election 45. The RCMP does not disclose until charges are laid. It does not publicly disclose until charges are laid whether or not the existence of a criminal investigation. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper, we'll go to Madame Brière. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci à nos témoins d'être avec nous.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here. It's Groundhog Day for some of you. A little earlier, my Conservative colleague insisted strongly on the communication of information which might be sensitive during an election campaign or sensitive to political parties. You talk about the importance of getting security clearance with regard to obtaining all of the necessary intelligence and how this could have an influence on how decisions are made in a timely manner when the information is received through a middle person and not directly, because a person might not have enough clearance to get the relevant information to make the best decision in the circumstance. Thank you for the question.
So I'm happy to be able to share with the committee that we were successful in securing a level of 2 cleared candidates for each party to be able to share the relevant information. We provided briefings before the election, over the course of the preparatory period, at the outset of the election, and during the election to those individuals. We also, though, ensured that we gave as much information as possible to each candidate and to each campaign. And we did that in a way that equipped them with not necessarily detail that was classified as related either to threat actors as referenced by the Conservative member, but on what foreign interference, for example, looks like, and ensure that each candidate and campaign had the ability to report it to site. We are also conscious that as much as we work in improving our efficiency of communications with Canadians, there still is a hesitance in some instances to trust the institutions of government. And so in particular, as it relates to foreign interference, where there can be real impact on individuals, we wanted to ensure that there are mechanisms for individuals, whether it be individual citizens or volunteers, to report those through a chain of trusted engagements that they have, either with the campaign managers, for instance, for particular ridings, or through the national representatives that we were briefing on a regular basis.
Anyone would like to add something about this question?
Thank you very much for the question. Absolutely, I can add a little bit from the cybersecurity perspective. So while it's true that a lot of the information that we have and that we use to inform threats to the election is classified, we also really work hard to make sure that we're able to share when we can. And so both ahead of the election and during the election, we shared a lot of information about the details that we saw, for example, from a cybersecurity perspective. So during some of those media tech briefs, and in some of our previous publications, for example, on threats posed by those linked to the government of Iran who are conducting cyber threats online, tried to share enough detail, so especially that candidates, that anyone involved in the campaign, had the information to know when to recognize when they might be targeted. That very high level of precision and technical detail is something that we really strive to make sure that we continue to improve on and share.
Merci beaucoup. Il semble qu'il y a
Thank you
beaucoup
very
de
much.
travail.
It seems that considerable work is being done in reaction, which is normal. My colleague Christine asked a question about social media. It's easier to react once there is an incident and inform the public, but is there any prevention happening? Thank you for the question. I'll respond to that, Mr. Chair. Yes, indeed, a lot of work is done in advance. As was said earlier, it's continuous. The work is ongoing. We have access to databases and there are narratives that we monitor on a daily basis with a team of analysts. So there is a posture which is taken before an election takes place. We will then establish parameters with regard to digital platforms. Many incidents are detected and which are not necessarily reported for several reasons, amongst others. Sometimes we don't want to amplify content which doesn't fit into the Canadian ecosystem. So an analysis is carried out in that type of situation. So we're not always in a reactive mood. We also work upfront to ensure that threats do not become so great that they might influence the opinions of Canadians. And I think that also applies to the other members of the site committee.
We'll suspend for 5 minutes to stretch our legs.
Mr. Chair. Thank you to the panelists for being here. I'm going to quote from your report on page 4. None of the incidents of foreign interference observed by the site task force during GE 45 were determined by the panel to have had an impact on Canada's ability to have free and fair elections. Close quote. And I think that you've reconfirmed that several times in your testimony earlier today. I'm going back to the report of Commissioner Hogue into foreign interference. And she stated that, in her opinion, information manipulation by foreign actors, quote, poses the single biggest risk to our democracy. It is an existential threat, she said. So I think that you all appreciate that the public is alarmed by that, because our democratic processes are, of course, very important to us. We want to know that we have free and fair democratic elections. You say that we have, but yet it's an existential threat. So how do you connect those two? And if I could maybe just clarify really where I'm going with this question. You also state that your goal is that Canadians must have full confidence that their election is secure. So how do you connect all of that together? Alarm on the one side, but you're saying we're hoping that you're feeling secure about your election processes.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I would offer this to the member, and certainly we were grateful to have each department here had the opportunity to participate in the public inquiry on foreign interference. Again, the instances that we saw in this particular election did not meet the threshold, and we spoke where we could about the instances that we did see. One of the things we emphasized to Canadians as it relates to the security of their vote was to ensure that we, on 2 occasions, shared with Canadians during the tech briefings that their votes are secret and their votes are secure. And I believe the committee heard last week from the Commissioner of Elections, and we often pointed during the tech briefs to the measures that our colleagues at Election Canada's were undertaking to ensure that the activities of voting at the polling stations were undertaken securely, and we emphasized the nature as it relates to foreign interference, that foreign interference by hostile state actors is an attempt by a hostile state actor to influence a vote, and that the system of voting in Canada ensures that votes are secret and are secure.
I understand that you all highly educated people who've dedicated the last number of years to exactly this topic are very well informed. Your meetings strive to maintain a high level of situational awareness throughout the election period. Another quote from your report. So you have a lot of high-level meetings with very important people. How does that communicate to the public? Mm-hmm. And are you comfortable that it is being communicated, maybe for Ms. Walsh, right? Because you talked about Get Cyber Safe campaign. How effective has that campaign been?
Yeah, so the Get Cyber Safe campaign is effective at reaching Canadians and making sure that the information that we have out there on advice on how to protect themselves, on navigating social media and mis and disinformation is reaching Canadians. That's one piece.
How do you measure that?
So measurement is a tricky one, but we certainly do put a lot of effort into making sure that we're making it very available and promoting it. But I think also it's not just that. It's also, during the election campaign, all of the media briefs that we had were about sharing not just information about the threats that we see and pointing Canadians to where they can find advice to help protect themselves from those threats, but also in talking about the process that we use, the fact that we work together, that this is a very collaborative effort amongst the security organizations, so that we're providing a level of confidence that we are looking for those threats and we are advising and mitigating.
Fair enough. Do you know that the message is coming through? Do you know that? This being an existential threat for Canadians.
Thank you. I think that one of the things that we would look to evolve in the future is definitely meeting communities where they are. We started that with the last election in terms of ensuring that materials were available in multiple languages. Also, in the case of transnational repression cases that we did speak about publicly, we engaged our colleague, the National Foreign Interference Coordinator, who engaged with various community organizations across the country to understand the pulse, if you will, around those incidents. And this is an area that I believe that we will endeavor as a national security community to do more of in the future.
I'm going to have a little more specific question. Page 9 of...
Sorry, you're over time. What's that? They're all very important questions, and we have plenty of time to ask more very important questions. We'll go to Madame Kayabaga, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, if I could ask Madame Lloyd, without naming any classified details, how does the task force assess the relative threat posed by different foreign states across operating in Canada? And how do you assess the priority of that during an election period?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the question is, how do we assess the threats and how do we assess the priority? Yeah. So we bring together classified and unclassified information. We bring together, as Madame Walsh said, the insights and information from all of the organizations present here, but also inputs from the broader National Security community. So, for example, observers on the site task force also include the Commissioner of Elections and Public Safety Foreign Interference Coordinator. So it is really by accumulating the wealth of experience and insights of the community that we come to an assessment that is an evaluation of the information, the facts that we have before us. In terms of prioritizing, I can assure you that this community takes every instance of foreign interference extremely seriously, as we do any threats to the security and safety of candidates or campaigns. And so on your question of priority, it's not so much as prioritization as ensuring that we address all during an election period.
Thank you for that. I think, obviously, in the last election, there were a lot of concerns around foreign interference. We have had the election commissioner come here, and he's told us that our institutions are some of the safest around the world. But because this question is raised quite often, and there is a specific case that our colleagues on the other side have raised, there could be an election at any time from here because we are in a minority parliament. And there's a lot of work that your task force is doing, but it's not palpable to the public. What kind of information can you share that would help someone, in the riding of London West feel much safer about the next election that could happen any time from now?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Perhaps I'll answer it in two ways. All of the information that we provided during the technical briefs is still available to all Canadians, but more importantly, all of the toolkits to protect democracy, to be cyber safe, to understand and navigate the social media environment of information and disinformation remain available to all Canadians. And we would look to amplify and increase that on an ongoing basis, and we do so as individual member departments. So in addition to the foreign interference and EU document from the service, there is also a CSIS-specific document that relates to threats to democratic institutions, similar to the report that Ms. Walsh emphasized. I would reiterate that a do better in the future would be to ensure that those publications are available even in more languages and that they are understood through engagement efforts with those Canadians and individual communities on an ongoing, sustained basis during the election, but also on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. We know that extortions have impacted communities like communities in Surrey, in Brampton, and other places, and some of those extortions have been linked to foreign interference. Is there any work that you're doing around it to address or to even assess the impact of the linkage between foreign interference and the extortions that are happening between in the communities of Surrey and Brampton and other GTA areas where it's very ethnic groups related, and what's that linkage around foreign interference and extortions?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I would share with the committee is that it's a very complex world that we are facing in terms of navigating national security. So the CSIS director in his public speech in November of 2025 highlighted the overlap of the various tools that are available to hostile state actors to be able to perpetrate foreign interference. And we also are very conscious of the Venn diagram of the types of techniques that foreign actors will use. So in some instances, there may be overlap with the use of criminal proxy agents. There may also be use in the foreign interference space, and the CSIS has issued an alert about this for Canadians, on use of private investigators to assist and enable transnational repression. Similarly, in the cyberspace, we are aware of the overlap between criminal entities that support various hostile states in undertaking those efforts. So while I won't speak to the specifics of any of ongoing RCMP or other police of jurisdiction efforts as it relates to extortion specifically, we can tell you that we do monitor the efforts of multiple states as it relates to their engagements of proxies, private sectors, or criminal organizations as part of what we look at in monitoring for threats to Canadians.
Thank you so much. Madame Normandin, 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'll start with a preamble. We had a witness last November, Mr. Charles Burton, who spoke to us about the work he did with regard to WeChat and the very sophisticated aspect of that media platform and how it engages in mass manipulation. Other countries have, like India, have banned WeChat, and its influence was on a par as that of TikTok. And you said your job is not to ban these platforms. That's the job of lawmakers. But if we are to make informed decisions, we have to know what's happening on the ground, and you are our eyes on the ground. So based on your experience on the ground, up to what point is WeChat an important vector for misinformation? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I might disappoint you with my answer because I can confirm that it's not our role to decide which platforms should be surveyed or which actions should be taken against such platforms. But what I can say is that publicly we communicate with Canadians any incident which may have happened on WeChat during the elections and even before the elections. So our work is ongoing, and when we perceive an information threat, we communicate that threat to Canadians so they can make informed decisions. Now, should these platforms be monitored more closely? Well, that's not our decision. Our job is to communicate information on WeChat and on other platforms around election time. Yes, I understand that you cannot make the decision, but with regard to the number of attempts of misinformation, you see that on the ground, and was WeChat involved in that? Well, I can confirm that, yes, WeChat was part of that group. We kept an eye on because we had detected disinformation campaigns on WeChat. So when in our technical briefings, we also included information on other platforms. WeChat was one platform amongst many we monitored. And if information threats came up, they were communicated to Canadians. But I cannot say that we focused more specifically on one platform rather than on another.
Mr. Van Popta for 5 minutes, please.
Good, thank you. Thank you again. In the previous round, we were talking about how or to what extent your group's high level of situational awareness was being communicated to the public. And I was asking that line of questions in the context of the panel's refusal to answer earlier questions about whether specific targets, ridings were being targeted. So at page 9 of your report, you state that the site task force, and I'm quoting, sent a comprehensive email to all candidates that included information from the site task force on tactics used by threat actors, personal cyber and security advice, and instructions on how to report incidents to the site task force, further empowering candidates to take proactive steps to secure their campaigns, close quote. I don't remember getting that. I was a candidate. I checked with my campaign manager, who I will acknowledge has a higher level of situational awareness about these sorts of things that I did. I was out knocking on doors and pounding up signs throughout the riding. So did my campaign get an email like that? Why wouldn't I have known about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can confirm to the member that that email was sent to all confirmed candidates based on a list shared with the site task force, through to Privy Council office specifically by Elections Canada, and that email was sent on April 11th, if that will help the member to locate it. And the description that you gave is accurate in terms of the information that we shared. And what we were trying to emphasize there was that it was clear for all candidates and campaigns the path by which they could communicate any instances that were observed by the campaign teams and by the volunteers and the candidates themselves during the period of the election.
Good. Okay, so I'll acknowledge that perhaps I was a bit negligent in not reading all the emails that came to my campaign email, but my campaign manager asserts that he did not receive it. Now, maybe he did, and maybe he also just glanced over it, and in which case he and I will have a little follow-up conversation about this. But just the fact that I didn't know about that email and about this service even being available makes me really, really wonder how effective your site task force has been with communicating with the public when your goal is to ensure that the public has a high degree of confidence in our electoral system.
Thank you for the question. I'll answer it perhaps also with a point of interest to your colleague, Madame Normandin. One of the things that we're aware of is that public opinion reporting that will come out later this year actually demonstrates that national security issues are most informed are most received, where they go to get their information, by Canadians via television, newspapers, and the internet. And social media actually falls below that list in terms of where people go to receive national security information. I would add for the member that in addition to the email that we sent, we did an unclassified brief that went over all of the information that was shared in that email to all campaigns. And so the opportunity for each and every candidate's campaign to be represented at that briefing was also put out to increase the chances that the candidates would understand the information that we were putting to help them maintain the integrity and security of their efforts.
Now, in your earlier testimony, or perhaps lack thereof, you didn't want to answer questions about whether specific targets or ridings were being targeted with foreign interference. But could you answer this question? If there was a riding or a campaign in a specific riding that was being targeted, did you reach out to that campaign specifically?
Thank you. So the process for ensuring that campaigns were informed when there was an instance that either met the threshold that we were going to speak about publicly, or where we had the ability through a cleared campaign, a cleared party member to share that information, was to do it through the cleared members, because in some instances we were sharing classified information that we could not speak about publicly. And so
I'm talking with the specific candidate whose campaign was being, the fairness of whose campaign was being threatened by foreign interference, which is an existential threat to our democratic systems.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So in every instance where we could share that information, where we felt that it was important for Canadians, including Canadians in ridings all across the country, to be aware of an instance of foreign interference, the panel made the determination about whether they would direct the site task force to speak about it during the tech briefings. In other instances, we offered classified and unclassified briefings on a regular basis during the campaign to those cleared party members to pass along information, which was up to those campaigns, national campaigns, to manage the impact of those that information sharing.
Thank you so much. Since I have a bad habit of not deleting emails I've read, I did, as a candidate, receive a email. It's from Security and Intelligence from PCO. The reline is ensuring the security of candidates in the 45th Canadian general election, with attachments from SITE and the RCMP. We'll go to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your continued testimony. My Conservative colleagues are bringing up some issues with possibly receiving communications, but it's also public knowledge that their party leader has refused to get security clearance. And I know they enjoy the yes or no questions. I just wanted to ask a simple one. This would be a yes or no, Ms. Lloyd. A political party leader without security clearance cannot directly receive classified intelligence or operational detail. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Whether or not an individual has a security clearance is protected by privacy implications. It is correct that we can only give classified information to those that are authorized to receive it. And as I mentioned earlier, all parties had cleared representatives for us to be able to do that.
Thank you. Cleared representative seems to be an extra step, and I will be looking here to make sure that we're maintaining, the integrity of elections. So I guess my concern would be how a political leader can make a timely, responsible decision during an election period when things change fast, if they're getting filtered or secondhand briefings rather than direct access to classified threat information. But I'll leave that as is. The SITE task force is also monitoring against malicious uses of artificial intelligence by hostile actors. That threat is changing rapidly. How are your responses changing as quickly? Maybe Ms. Walsh can answer that question, because it's a bit of a cat and mouse game.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yeah, so we certainly do see changes in the way that artificial intelligence is being used online. In our day-to-day lives, we've seen how much easier it is in the past year or two to use artificial intelligence. And so we see the same thing happening with the threat actors who use it in their malicious activities. To monitor that, we look globally at how it's being used online. So, for example, when we put forward our publication last year on the threats AI pose to democratic process, we looked at over 200 elections that occurred in that sort of year and a half period globally ahead of that to understand what are the tactics being used, what are the techniques. And we put that into the report so that Canadians have that information to understand how to protect themselves and what the threat is. But we also use it internally. So we use that to derive the advice and guidance that we provide. We use it to provide insight into our day-to-day operations in cybersecurity for Canada. We share it with our colleagues across the security community. So it's a big piece that sort of helps us inform how we operate and in the advice and guidance we give to Canadians.
My follow-up question, you've already answered already. So you are looking at other countries, trying to learn from that in what I would call off-season.
Absolutely. So we look at what's available, both from what's available online, from what we see through the important intelligence that we have within Canada, to put together a picture of how that use by cyber threat actors evolves over time.
Thank you. Mr. O'Hanian, we wanted to get you in on the conversation, hadn't had a chance yet, as the member from the RCMP, Federal Policing Security Intelligence and International Policing Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force. So thank you. My question to you was, how does the RCMP determine when suspected election interference activity crosses from influence into criminal or coercive conduct, and then what steps are taken and what coordination happens?
Oh, well, thank you for the question. In terms of what the thresholds are, those are determined depending on the piece of legislation that we're enforcing, whether it's the Criminal Code of Canada, the Security Offences Act. There are stipulations in there that are quite clear about when that threshold is crossed. What I can say is when the threshold is crossed, the RCMP will take the necessary actions to investigate to its fullest extent, whether it's a cyber threat or a physical threat, and in the course of whether this happens during a by-election or a general election, that will be shared with our site task force partners so that they have at least not visibility over the criminal investigation, but over the fact that an incident has occurred.
Thank you so much. We will now turn to Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to drill down a little bit about what happened to Joe Tay in Don Valley North. The election panel announced to the public that there was a transnational repression campaign and went on to cite some of the targeting as it specifically pertained to Mr. Tay, and that announcement was made on April 17th, so nearly at the very end of the writ period. Mr. Tay testified that the day after he was nominated as the Conservative candidate in Don Valley North, which was on March 23rd, the following day, the RCMP attended to his home to advise him that there were credible threats to his safety that had been intercepted. I just want to confirm, Mr. O'Hanian, that is correct, that the RCMP did attend to his home at that time.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. And it would be fair to say that there were threats that persisted against Mr. Tay through the course of the election campaign?
Apologies, sir. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I'm not able to, I don't have that level of detail, Mr. Chairman, but I'd be happy to take the question back and provide
If you would, that would be appreciated.
Just 1 second. Oh, we'll pause your time. You don't have to turn on and off the mics. We run into the same thing too, and it's they'll take care of it. Just one little job you don't have to do or worry about. Sorry, Mr. Cooper, please continue.
Okay, Mr. Tay was eventually told by the RCMP that it was unsafe for him to go door to door to canvass because of these threats. When was Mr. Tay informed of that? At what point?
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I will have to go back and provide a detailed answer to that question. I don't have an answer to that.
If you would, because I'm just trying to understand the timeline, because very early on, and in fact, well before the writ was dropped, there was information that had been intercepted that Mr. Tay was being targeted, at least on social media propaganda efforts by Beijing. Now, Mr. Tay went on to indicate that although in the report of the panel that was released, as well as the press release, media release that went out detailing the transnational repression campaign, that it involved much more than propaganda, It involved voter suppression efforts, particularly targeting Chinese seniors' residents, as well as harassment, surveillance, and threats of violence against Mr. Tay. I don't suppose, Mr. Ohayon, you would dispute that.
Thank you for the question. As I've said before, I can't comment beyond the confirmation that there was a criminal investigation that was opened as a result of the threats against Mr. Tay. The details that the member is bringing up may or may not have come up during the investigation. I can't confirm.
Okay, and since you can't confirm the details, but you're undertaking to provide some level of response to this committee with respect to those details to the degree that they can be disclosed, I would take it that whatever information the RCMP had, that was relayed to the panel. And that would have been occurring on a day-to-day basis, a frequent basis?
Well, what I can commit to is providing the answers that we can. I can't, I am, like I've said.
Yeah, I'm just trying to confirm that that information would have been relayed to the site task force, to the panel.
Pardon me, I didn't hear the question, sir.
The question is just to confirm that the information was routinely being relayed to the panel.
I'm not in a position to confirm what was presented to the panel in terms of Mr. Tay.
Okay, fine. You said there was, Ms. Lloyd, if you just very briefly would answer
certainly. Your time.
We're over time. My apologies, Mr. Cooper. Go to Madame Briere for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Le renforcement des mesures.
The strengthening of cybersecurity measures is a priority of the panel. You collect information, a lot of information, a lot of intelligence, also from abroad, also with regard to threat actors. And we know that D-Day will arrive soon, or Q-Day, because quantic information will become a reality soon. And artificial intelligence will have positive aspects, but if it falls into the wrong hands, it could have negative fallout. So you will have to deal with very complex issues such as quick decryption of intelligence, and hackers know this. It seems that they are already collecting data to take advantage of them later on. Data theft is up. Identity theft is up. And what we say and do is being spied on. So how are you preparing for all these technological changes, especially with regard to quantum computing, which can undermine decryption security measures? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question.
For providing a nice summary of what we do see when it comes to some of the cyber threats that are out there. And so when I think about it, there is a lot of technology that's amazing, that's helping us to improve the way that we do our work and our job and our daily lives across Canada and in the world. But some of them do pose threats. And so just going back to the question, there's a threat posed by the development of quantum computers that could break the encryption that we use and really impact our cybersecurity. As I've already discussed, the threat posed by AI and how threat actors use that online is something that we monitor and look at quite closely. And there are steps that we take to mitigate that, both when it comes to what we do on a daily basis to help Canadians, critical infrastructure, our government institutions to ensure that they're protected against those threats. But it also applies to what we do for election security. So a couple of things I might note are that we work very closely with Elections Canada and other institutions with ties to our democratic processes to be sure that we're collectively keeping those systems safe from all of these threats. We provide advice and guidance and work closely with critical infrastructure, who of course have a role in our democracy as well. You know, you can't vote if you can't get to the polling station and receive that information you need online. So all of those pieces we assess and we look at and think about the threat, and we use it to inform the advice and guidance and the partnership that we have with government and critical infrastructure, and especially in that critical time during an election.
Est-ce que le partage des...
The sharing of information with other countries, for instance, could that help you to get ahead of those threats? Always with regard to the issue. Yes, if I can follow up on that.
As far as the Global Affairs Canada, we're also part of the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism, alongside G7 members, as well as Australia, New Zealand, Australia, and the Netherlands, and now Poland as well. And we do share information in real time about these threats, and we feed on of each other in terms of building the procuring and building the tools that we need. As my colleague said, I think AI and quantum are the threats are very real, and they were outlined, but there are also tools that we can use to make sure that we are keeping up with the evolution of these threats as well. So there are threats, but there are also tools that we use and in collaboration with our partners.
I'm done.
Madame Normandin, 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Vous me
Thank you very much. If I may, Mr. Babu, to come back to the answer that you gave me previously, you said that, yes, there were incidents on WeChat, but we've also seen incidents on other platforms. So I don't see how we can put Pinterest and WeChat on the same footing. I would like to hear you on the analysis you've carried out on the greater risks posed by WeChat. Its ownership, the way it's used. I would like to hear you speak to the real risks posed by WeChat. Even though you can't give us a qualitative analysis, can you give us a quantitative idea of how many incidents of foreign interference were carried out on WeChat? Well, the analysis we carried out is a general one of all platforms, so I can't speak to a quantitative analysis with regard to one platform versus another. So we look at all platforms, and we do this for operational security reasons and not to reveal too much information on Canada's capacity to counter these threats. So I cannot go into the details with regard to incidents we have detected on one platform versus another. But I think what's important to tell Canadians is that we are monitoring all platforms known by the public in all languages involved, so we can get information in real time, especially with regard to threats that we can counter. Thank you very much. Quickly, Ms. Lloyd, you talked about a poll that was, or a survey that was carried out about how many Canadians use traditional media versus how many use social media. What about the different diasporas within Canada? Are some of these groups, do they turn more towards social media or traditional media?
The member that public opinion research should come out later this year, probably in the summer, with I hope that a level of detail would be provided there. And I'd just make a précision on my point, that my point was that for national security matters, we see the Canadian public continuing to leverage traditional media above social platform media, social media. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
We'll now turn, I believe they're splitting their time, but we'll start with Mr. Cooper.
Ms. Lloyd, I'll let you answer the question, but I'd ask just regarding Mr. Tay and the interaction between the site task force and the panel, just very briefly, just to confirm that that was ongoing on a more or less day-to-day basis.
That's right. So I can confirm for Mr. Chair and through the chair to the member that the panel was briefed on 6 occasions during the monitoring period as it relates to Mr. Tay, and the cleared representatives for the Conservative Party were briefed on 2 occasions.
Thank you for that. Mr. Ohayan, you indicated that there was a criminal investigation that had been opened. Is that investigation ongoing?
I can't provide any further detail besides confirming that a criminal investigation was opened.
Okay, thank you for that. And lastly, before I turn it over to Mr. Jackson, it was indicated in the background around the situation in Don Valley North that with respect to the propaganda campaign against Mr. Tay, that engagement levels have been low, with an increase at various points during the writ period. What were the number of interactions and views? What was the scope of engagement?
The scope of engagement was in the thousands to 10,000s of engagement, totaling views and likes and shares. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'll turn it over to Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Thank you, Chair. In retrospective, last year, Parliament passed a law getting rid of the first generation limit for Canadians living abroad. And so I'm just curious how your officials and your work as the task force are going to ensure that Canadians, which are now a greater number of Canadian citizens living abroad who have the right to vote, are protected from foreign interference in casting their ballots.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's an excellent and interesting question. I am aware of the legislative changes that the member refers to, and I could offer that the reporting that we did have from individual citizens, to my knowledge, all originated from within Canada, and that would be certainly a takeaway that we could reflect on what we could do better in the next election. Thank you, the member, for the question and the input.
I think that's just a point of concern that perhaps these citizens living abroad, of which there are now many more by this virtue of this legislative change, they may not be aware of the task force and the efforts that you're undertaking to protect them and protect Canadians living within the country. So it is a concern, given that there are upwards of not just a couple hundred, but millions potentially now, or thousands anyway. And so I appreciate you undertaking that to protect them as well, because every vote counts, and they get to choose which constituency, is their ballot's going to be cast on based on where they last live, is how I understand it's going to be implemented. So it's quite complicated when you get multi-generations down. And so anyway, I don't know if anybody else has any additional thoughts on that, but I'm just quite concerned about the potential impacts of this, and perhaps that should have been thought of before the legislation was implemented, but we are where we are.
And maybe, thank you very much. If you'll let me add some additional information, I think, an opportunity for us too, because so much of what we communicated about this is online, and the information that we have and we put out there for Canadians. And so maybe a point for us to be looking at to say, okay, how do we make sure that we're reaching Canadians abroad with that same information and insight?
50 seconds if you'd like. You don't have to take it.
Well, I'll be very quick. I'm also just concerned about, I know I take your point about TV and being the main source of information. Coming from a younger, like a Gen Z perspective, like we don't pay for cable news subscriptions. And so I am concerned about the narrative and the information that people are getting off of sources like TikTok. And are you engaging on those platforms in terms of disinformation and those types of things going on?
I'll answer very briefly. I would just confirm that, yes, we are active on these platforms in terms of providing information to Canadians directly where they consume it. One thing that I would note as well is that during G45, we made sure that the information was also available in simplified and traditional Chinese to make sure that we could reach the constituents and that they could absorb the information that was communicated by the site task force. So yes, to your question, we are communicating on various social media platforms to Canadians.
Thank you so much. we won't get into this debate. Madame Kaibaga, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
You don't want to give me the floor if you don't want to get in that debate, but thank you so much. Just because it's a relevant conversation we're having right now, and it could be relevant as we're potentially in an election anytime soon, as we are minority government and an election can happen at any point. Can the task force walk us through how intelligence is stress tested inside your group and before it informs a decision, especially in moments where there is an election and there is information that is incomplete or rapidly evolving?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I believe the committee would have heard some of this testimony in the evidence presented by the panel last week in terms of the range of considerations that is given to the intelligence that we put before it. In terms of the intelligence originating from CSIS, for example, what we endeavor to ensure is that the intelligence that we put forward to the panel is characterized. And so a panel would have detail about the level that would help them to make the determination on the level of confidence that they have in that piece of information or intelligence. And so that can range from qualifying whether it is a single piece of information where it has been corroborated, or whether it is a new information, or whether it has come from one of our partners at this table, or as my colleagues have mentioned, whether it has come from another intelligence agency that collaborates and is also monitoring, particularly in 2024, that was the year of elections around the world, interference that occurred in their countries, and sometimes as a result of that, they are able to inform Canadian concerns as well.
Maybe if I could add, Mr. Chair, to that response. So both our teams who worked very, very hard, as Ms. Lloyd said, to assess this information, to make sure that we were incorporating all of it and judging it, we also met very regularly at different levels. So our teams were engaged in that assessment process. We met daily as an assistant deputy minister community to know and to understand and provide another level of challenge and feedback before all that information was ultimately shared with the panel.
I guess what I was trying to get from this question is I would hope that if we're in an election and there's something that's happening rapidly, like the response is much quicker than going through many different, layers of bureaucracy to get to a decision, and how, just understanding how do you flag that and how do we make sure that we're not going to be dealing with it post an election and we can actually take action in that immediate moment.
Thank you for the question. So as Ms. Walsh said, we did meet daily, and we put our information through a brief through the chair of the committee, which was CSIS, so the director of CSIS gave a weekly brief to the panel. That being said, had we had an instance where we wanted to raise something urgently, there was always the opportunity to convene the panel on an urgent basis. And I would also add that it is important to understand that in our ongoing mandates, we are collecting constantly, outside of election periods, information that also can be relevant during the election period. So we often found ourselves in situations where we had context to add to an involving incident and already had some information that was relevant to the panel's consideration.
And looking ahead into a potential election, what would help Canadians most understand that vigilance, for them to remain vigilant, especially there's been a lot of comments in the committee on the study around ethnic communities that may have some challenges going to vote because they fear that, foreign interference is a big threat, and they fear that even their votes may be intercepted, which we already talked about the fact that our votes are secure and they're safe. But what kind of information do you think Canadians can have right now as they prepare for an election?
Thank you for the question. I hope that we've succeeded in communicating that the information and toolkits that we developed in advance of GE45 remain available online and are actively talked about as we all engage with communities, as well as the foreign interference coordinator from public safety engages with different communities, to make sure that that level of awareness and those tools are used on an ongoing basis, particularly to combat some of the threats that my colleague Mr. Babu mentioned in terms of disinformation, which could occur on any issue, regardless of whether it's an election period. Sorry, I see Bridget wants to jump in, so I'm going to stop.
Thanks very much for the question. So maybe what I'll add too is that We always look to see if there is something that we should be communicating, election or not, and in preparation if need be. So we typically put out our publication on threats to the democratic process every 2 years. Last winter, when we saw those threats from AI increasing, we went off cycle. So we went off cycle, we put it out there, we worked with the media to make sure it was distributed. We put it onto social media so that those, maybe from ZZZ would pick it up, and we did all the things to promote and make sure it was out there.
Thank you so much. Before we go, I have a couple of questions. I'm getting into a bad habit of asking questions at the end, but we've talked about security clearance, and I think for a lot of Canadians that really doesn't mean anything. I know I've been through the process, and I'm certain you've all been through the process. Could you just briefly explain, like, from the broad applications through interviews, like what physically happens when you apply for your security clearance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I clarify whether it is specific to members of Parliament that your question is asked?
That's my experience, but yes, specifically to members of Parliament or perhaps people who, party members who have gone through this process.
Okay. I'll take that as CSIS and not necessarily as site. So in an instance where a party wishes to have a member cleared for a security clearance, that is something that is done through sponsorship and approach of the Privy Council office. And that would be referred to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service as it relates to conducting our government screening processes. We apply that kind of lens to the security clearances that and advice we give back. And so in the government employment space, that's called government security screening, and in the security clearances for members, we do a very similar process. So we use our authorities under the CSIS Act to be able to investigate and provide advice back to the sponsoring department. In this case, for members like yourselves, that sponsoring department is the Privy Council office, and as the chair mentioned, that can include interviews with you as individuals and also individuals around you.
So you agree with me, it's a very lengthy, thick application that you have to go through?
Certainly for my colleagues here at the table, it is in fact more lengthy than what you are subject to. Most of us have top secret enhanced clearances, which has a number of specific criteria under the government policy for security clearances.
And a lengthy interview on what is in the application is what is found by the process of going through that application. Is that correct?
It can be a lengthy interview.
And if you had something to hide, you probably wouldn't want to go through that process, correct?
I would say that those processes often can give opportunities to clarify concerns that we would have. So there is a benefit to engaging in the process and having the opportunity to have any misconceptions clarified as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate witnesses being here, and seeing no further business, we're adjourned.